Hi, I'm Mike McLean. Welcome to the Short Circuit podcast brought to you by Swift Aircraft. In this series, we'll be chatting with a variety of people from all walks of life, but who all have one thing in common: aviation. We'll discuss how and why they got into aviation, what or who inspired them, and what they would say to encourage young people to get involved. Flight fascinates many of us, and our guests will explain why they are compelled to look to the sky. Today's chat is with David Swanson. I've been trying to find someone like David to talk to for a while. Operating airports is a complex but necessary part of the industry, and how they affect their local communities is something that needs to be understood and managed. Airports are more than just runways, they are lifelines, and this is felt acutely in remote and rural communities. David's insight and experience has drawn him into the world of aviation, and he gives us a peek behind the scenes. But before we start, I have a request. Please remember to click the like button, share with friends and colleagues, and subscribe. This really does help us get the word out. So, with that in mind, here goes. Good afternoon, David Swanson, and welcome to the Short Circuit podcast. And we're going to launch straight into it with question number one. And question number one is, who are you and what is your current role that's connected with aviation?
Afternoon, Mike. Well, thanks very much for having me. I'm really excited to be on. As I say, thanks very much. My name's David Swanson. I work with the Highland Council, which is one of the local authorities in Scotland. And my role with them is as the project officer for the Wick public service obligation. I can unpack that a little bit for you if that would be helpful.
Yes, please.
I'm not sure even if the term public service obligation is hugely familiar to a lot of people. Certainly here in Scotland and across large parts of Europe, it is essentially a mechanism to support scheduled transport services, usually air services, in a situation where they wouldn't necessarily otherwise be commercially viable, but are desirable because they support something else, so regional economic development or a social need, for example. So the funding is provided by two public bodies, in large part by the Scottish Government to the tune of £1 million a year, and then with the Highland Council itself contributing £300,000 a year. But it's the council that ultimately has the relationship with the airline, and that's really where I come in. So some of my job is fairly boring stuff, fairly standard contract management. We don't really need to talk about that too much. But an awful lot more of it is, community outreach, stakeholder liaison, making sure that the service is actually meeting the needs that it's supposed to within the community. And obviously then also doing a lot of advertising and PR work around it, trying to promote the service locally, and also working very, very closely with the airline, which is Eastern Airways, by the way.
Okay.
To set schedules and really kind of try and make sure that the service that we're offering is meeting the needs of the community.
Okay, so Eastern Airways, I'm guessing large parts of the UK and definitely probably outside the UK, most people won't have heard of it. So where are they based and where do they fly to and from?
Sure. So they are based, their home base is in Humberside, in the north of England. They largely operate as a UK regional carrier. So they operate, I believe, Humberside to Newquay. They do some routes within the UK as well. I believe they have some of the Welsh PSO routes. And they operate quite a substantial amount of routes out of Aberdeen as well. So they do Aberdeen to Wick, which is the route that I look after. I believe they also operate Aberdeen-Sunborough, and they do quite a lot of charter work for the oil industry as well.
Right, okay. And again, I'm guessing that many people in the UK have no idea where Wick is. So,
of course, yes, I could have led with that. In fact, it's why we renamed the airport Wick John O'Groats Airport a few years ago. with the assumption being that maybe more people will know where John O'Groats is than will Wick. Yeah, we're a small town, about 7,000 people in the far north of Scotland, and we're about I would say about 20 minutes drive from John O'Groats, which is the most northerly point in the UK.
Right.
So we're quite remote, quite a regional area. Our nearest city is Inverness, which is about 2.5 hours drive away. So we're quite a long distance from anywhere else in the UK.
Yeah. Well, I was just about to say, I think it comes as a surprise to many Brits at the actual size of the island, the British mainland. It's once you get north of the border, distances become a bit longer. So Wick, I mean, I've been up a few times in the past. I didn't realize Wick had an airport. So I'm guessing it's an old Air Force base.
I believe so. Yeah, it's quite a lot of the infrastructure still there is World War II era. In fact, I'm up at the airport this coming weekend. There's a whole new initiative just being launched, commemorating Caithness at War, including, I believe, a display at the airport commemorating the airmen who lost their lives flying out of Wick and the various other RAF bases in this area.
Right. Okay. So how did you get into this? How did you get into the aviation side of this business then?
So yeah, as I said, I really came at this from a very non-aviation background. Really, my introduction to this was I was working at the time with the local Chamber of Commerce, doing sort of business development, some sort of economic policy work, things like that. We obviously became involved in the airport consultative committee. So I kind of, as the name suggests, a small body of local consultees really involved in the development of the airport itself. And that was a real eye opener for me, and it was something that I really had to, I think, learn on the job about aviation. I think maybe like most people, who've never had any involvement in the industry, I hadn't pictured what was involved even in running such a small regional airport as Wick. I think day to day you don't really think about it. You turn up at the airport, you get on a plane, maybe you have some consciousness that there's security involved is the fairly obvious one. But other than that, really had no idea about the industry. So yeah, through that initial introduction, I met a lot of people, at the airport, in the airlines, people who are very clearly passionate about aviation as an industry. I found that very inspiring. I had to ask them a lot of stupid questions. That's something that's going to come up a lot. But the real change of pace and the real kind of involvement for me came around the period 2017-18. So it's at that point that we started to see, we were having some concerns. So there were two commercial routes operating out of Wick at that stage. There was a flight to Edinburgh and a flight to Aberdeen. As stakeholders, we were starting to have quite some concerns about the long-term perhaps viability of those routes. And it's at that point that we really started to think about this idea of a public service obligation and whether that would be needed. It's at that stage that I started to really be quite dedicated to the airport as a project, if you like. So starting with some very early, very early basic policy work, kind of looking at what would be involved in a public service obligation. But over the next couple of years, then working very, very closely with some specialist aviation consultants to actually pull together a full and comprehensive business case for air services from Wick. Over that couple of years, I've mentioned I had to ask a lot of stupid questions. You would not believe the number of stupid questions I had to ask, but really, really started to get a sense of just how important I think the airport is and can be to a local community.
I wouldn't say any questions along that road are stupid. It's just learning. If you don't know, you don't know, and the quickest way to find out is to ask somebody.
It's a fair point. You haven't heard some of the questions I had to ask, right enough.
It's with hindsight, it's very easy to say, "Oh, why did I say this?" Obvious, but like I said, if you don't know, then you shouldn't be. Nobody should be scared to ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point, and yeah, I think it is vital. When you're coming into an industry like aviation, it is very technical, and there are a lot of people in the industry maybe who've been involved for a number of years. all of them are, in my experience, are more than willing to give their time to sit down and speak to people and answer questions. And everyone I've met in this industry has been passionate about it.
That's one thing I would definitely agree with you, is that when you get into aviation at any level, one of the things that does start to come out very, very quickly is the passion and the involvement and ownership that people have. When they get into it, they get into it.
Absolutely.
It's quite strange. So, right, so it leads me on to a couple of things then. So you're saying that you having to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
What was the most surprising thing that you learned in your early days, and what was, shall we say, the most important thing that you learned in response to your questions that you had? There you go.
Wow, that's good. Good questions. Surprising, I think. I think I would have to say it's the complexity of the operation.
Mm-hmm.
As I say, I think it's to the credit of the aviation industry that as an outsider, you don't see the huge amount of work that goes in every day just to making a plane go from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never had to think about things like, let's just say, for example, the challenges of maybe operating with slightly older airframes, and all the things that brings. You need people who are certified to work on those, people who are certified to fly them. It's not a case that you can train anyone up as a pilot, let's say, and stick them in any aircraft and say, right, off you go. I realise, as I say, that sounds from the outside like maybe it was a very stupid point of view to have at the time, but I think I really hadn't appreciated just how much work goes into it.
But safety is paramount, so that
Absolutely, and I think maybe coming into the sort of second part of that question as well is how much of what makes it all work is the staff on the ground. It's the staff at the airport. It's every part of the operation, from the moment a passenger walks through the door to the moment they walk out the door on the other side. Um, it's very easy to sit there and think, well, there's check-in staff, there's security, and then you get on a plane and somebody flies you and you get off at the other end and you go back out. But in between all of that, there's mechanics and firefighters and air traffic controllers and this whole web of people who are making everything tick over, in an ideal world, more or less seamlessly.
Yeah, there's an awful lot going on behind the scenes, I reckon, in any airport. I mean, even a small regional airport. I mean, how many staff are employed at the airport?
That's a good question. I think the answer is around 50 or 60.
Okay, so for a small town in a remote area, that's a fairly big employer.
It is, and I think as well, it's I talked before a little bit about the economic impact of an airport, or the importance of it. One, you're absolutely right. As an employer in and of itself, a local airport like Wick is a major benefit to a small community. But I think there's an awful lot else there as well, in terms of work for local businesses. So there's a lot of groundworks that needs to be done. Even things as basic as grass cutting.
Yeah.
Electrical works, terminal maintenance, all sorts of things, and all of that benefit spills out from the airport into the local community. It has a huge impact, really.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm guessing that in that particular location, then the airport is also a bit of a lifeline for medical evacuation and that sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. You've hit the nail on the head there, and a lifeline is the term that we really would continue to impress. I think when it comes to, as you say, medical services is a huge thing.
For example, if somebody needs to get to a significant hospital, I'm guessing Inverness is the nearest big one. So, and doing that journey from Wick to Inverness in an ambulance, that's a tough ride.
It can be a long old trip, yeah.
Yeah.
And especially if you consider, in cases where every second, every minute counts, head injuries, for example, or heart attacks, being able to get someone to Inverness or Aberdeen or Edinburgh in minutes rather than hours is vital.
Yeah.
absolutely vital.
Okay. Okay. So is it hard recruiting and retaining staff? Again, you've got a limited pool to recruit from, I guess. So, I mean, I suspect that you're not going to get many people moving into the area to work at your facility in particular. They might move into the area and then end up working, but they're not, the airport's not going to draw people in. I'm guessing, but I could be wrong.
Um, I I think that it has the same challenges as any industry in a remote area like ours. You know, it is an issue that's facing us as a region. It's difficult to recruit people. It's difficult to retain young people in the area.
Hmm.
You know, unfortunately, I don't want to paint a doom and gloom picture, but you know, some of the population projections that we're seeing, for example, are showing quite substantial decline by 2040. And in particular, we're seeing quite a changing demographic. You know, young people leaving and not coming back.
Hmm.
To my mind, that is actually one of the reasons that having an airport and having air services is so vital for the region. It can help to reduce that sense of remoteness.
Yeah, I'd empathize with that. I mean, our Swift Aircraft, our headquarters are based outside Norwich,
Well,
which, while East Anglia is much more densely populated than Caithness, it's still pretty rural and it's a long way from anywhere else. So recruiting and retaining staff is not always the easiest thing. So, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the impression is that with aviation and airports and so on, a lot of people would think, well, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a pilot, I'm not technically minded, so there's not a job for me there. But that's not the case. I mean, you must have
oh,
catering,
absolutely.
you've got wildlife control, all sorts of stuff. I'm guessing.
Oh, absolutely. And maybe as I said earlier, I didn't realize myself until I came into this industry. You know, just how much goes on in keeping an airport running. We've talked about the obvious stuff, pilots and engineers and mechanics, but yeah, wildlife control's a huge one, especially as you start to get out into more rural airports.
Hmm.
How do you manage that? How do you manage that in a humane way? I think there's a lot of concern and a lot of growing concern across the industry about ecological impact of aviation.
Hmm.
And I do think again it's one thing I could laud Wick Airport for is working very closely actually with local stakeholders to understand and mitigate that, manage that. There's huge opportunities in front of house and customer facing work in airports. I think that's arguably one of the most important parts of the whole experience.
I
You
mean,
know, as a sorry, go on.
yeah, I was just going to ask. I mean, are there, so there must be some sort of spin-off industries and or businesses as opposed to industries coming off, like springs to mind is car hire. So most airports you go to now, you're able to hire a car, and especially with things like the North Coast 500 and
Absolutely.
John O'Groats, you're going to get some people who they don't want to drive from the south of England, or they're coming in from overseas. They want to get up to the Highlands, then get some transport, go out, do the visiting, go and see the sites, see the whales, whatever it is they're going to visit, and then fly back. They don't want to have to do the extra 4, 5, 600 miles drive just to get to where you are.
Absolutely, yeah, and yeah. So direct spin-offs, things like car hire, absolutely. There's car hire providers based at the airport. Tourism in general, definitely, it's a huge driver for tourism in this region. And again, that's something that's really vital to us. I think. Did you say you've been up to Wick before yourself?
Yes, yes, I'm old enough to have been up before the North Coast 500. So it was when
Okay,
I
fair.
came up, it was empty. There was nothing
Yeah,
around. It was great.
I mean, we live in such a beautiful part of the world. We're very privileged to do so, and delighted that we're able to share that with people and really able to offer people a way to get to this region, very quickly, very efficiently. An interesting point about onward travel, I think it's one thing that I always like to bring up, and one thing I'd like us to do a bit more of. Actually, being an airport the size that it is, Wick is very easy to walk to. I quite regularly walk into the airport from the town centre if I've got meetings.
Oh wow.
It's it's about a 15-20 minute walk from the town centre. Nice, easy. sling a bag over your shoulder, walk up, hop on a flight.
Oh, on a
You
nice
know,
summer's day, that would be very, very pleasant.
absolutely, we do get them from time to time. Right at this moment, if I were to look outside my window, I don't know that I would fancy walking up to the airport right enough. But
Yeah.
I think there's real opportunities for us there actually to promote a bit more in terms of active travel. It seems odd to fly into an airport to cycle, for example, but
Mhm.
why not? You can fold away a bike and store it in a luggage compartment, fly in, do some cycling around the Highlands.
Well, I must admit, I mean, getting when you go sort of inland from Wick and up, taking across the moors up to Thurso and then sort of looping back
Mhm.
round through John O'Groats and Durness and back down the coastline. I mean, it is a spectacular part of the world. So, talking about sightseeing and stuff, do you find you get much traffic from general aviation? Do you get,
We
people
do,
just
yeah.
coming for a look
It's
around?
again, it's yeah. There's some really interesting mix of stuff happening at Wick Airport. Actually, it's great. And if you're someone like I've become, who's got your flight radar on your phone and constantly checking to see what might be going overhead or what might be landing, it's a great opportunity to spot a few rarely seen aircraft as they pop in for a visit.
Are you confessing
One
to having caught the bug then? You've got the aviation bug now.
perhaps a touch, yes. I will admit, we were recently flying out of Edinburgh on holiday to Berlin, and my partner was despairing at me, peering out the window, going, "Oh, is that a Saab 340 with the such and such livery on it?"
Yep.
It does a little bit, but yeah, coming back to GA traffic at Wick, yeah, absolutely. One of the things in particular, we've got a great little organisation. They're actually the fixed base operator for Wick, Far North Aviation.
Hmm.
They do a tremendous amount of work to promote the airport to GA traffic, and they service quite a lot of transatlantic ferry flight traffic because of where Wick sits.
Oh, right. I hadn't
Um,
thought of that. That's going to be interesting. You're going to see some unusual stuff there.
you do, yeah. Don't ask me to name any models. I'm not quite that far gone yet, but yeah, I think it's a real benefit there. And again, that's a small business that's being supported through having the airport there.
Okay. The question I was going to ask is about STEM and youth outreach and engaging young people. So, does the airport and the company, do they have a policy of trying to retain and engage with the youth in the area?
Absolutely. I know. I know that the airport itself, does recruit very, strongly from the local area, and I know there's been some really good outreach work happening with local schools, for example. I think it comes back to this question about recruitment and retention. Really, to my mind, sustainable recruitment happens when you're able to capture the interest of young people in the area
Hmm.
early, demonstrate there's good jobs here, and actually demonstrate that these are jobs that not only are in their community but are benefiting their community. I think there's something really vital to the idea that you come to work every day and you're doing something that helps to build your own community up and helps to make it a better place to live.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, do you have? Is there an air cadet squadron up there, or is it?
There is. Funny enough, I was just speaking to the chap that runs it. They're just undergoing some rebranding and reorganisation. Obviously, as with everything else aviation related, the COVID pandemic really kind of knocked their activities quite substantially. But yeah, I believe they're hoping to be back up and running this year, which would be fantastic. I mean, I think one thing I would say is I think we're in a really exciting place right now for
Mhm.
aviation, particularly regional airports and regional operators. So one thing that we've really got happening at the moment here in the Highlands and Islands is the sustainable aviation test environment.
All right. Okay.
So there's quite a strong commitment from Scottish Government, that the Highlands and Islands should be a net zero aviation region. I believe the commitment was by 2040. That was a few years ago. I'm not sure if that date is still exactly the same. but that there's some really, really exciting stuff happening there across whole ranges of alternative fuels,
Hmm.
different mechanisms, different types of aircraft, where things like autonomous aircraft, for example, ultra short takeoff and landing, electric VTOL.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can reel off, um,
Yeah, because even, I mean, not too far from you up in Orkney, they've now got, is it the post
that's right,
office are
yeah.
flying a UAV? So,
Yeah, so Wick was involved in some of that as well. Yeah, the wind racers stuff that was happening here.
mhm.
Yeah, I just think if you were looking to get into aviation, this would be a fantastic time to do it. I think there's so much opportunity just coming around the corner.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a
I think it's a time the industry could use some new people coming in with some bright new ideas.
we put time is shot by. So before we get cut off, I'm going to ask you the big question of the day, and this is our signature question. All the guests get asked it, and that
Yeah.
is, what's your favorite aircraft and why? And I'm very interested, since you're a newbie to the industry.
Hmm.
What's your gut answer going to be?
Okay. Well, I feel I should really say the Jetstream 41 because that's what we fly between Wick and Aberdeen. But I'm not going to say that because that would be a boring answer. Um, it's a very specific aircraft that I have in mind here. Actually, it's de Havilland DH60 Moth.
Oh
I
wow!
actually
Okay,
have the aircraft reg, GEBMO. It was
okay.
flown by the 19th Lord Sempill, who was something of a colourful character, it would be safe to say. Um, I will invite your listeners to read his Wikipedia entry and make their own minds up.
Okay.
Um, but the notable thing for me is that it was the first ever Land's End to John O'Groats flight, as far as I'm able to track down.
Oh wow! Okay,
They
wasn't
flew
aware of
in
that one.
1926. It took 8 hours and 14 minutes with one refueling stop to fly a total of 630 miles. Now, bearing in mind this is an aircraft that's built mostly out of plywood and canvas.
Yeah, there's
Um,
not an awful lot to it. Wow. Okay.
I just think it's a fascinating moment in aviation history. If you look, I mean, what the Wright brothers flew in 1903.
That's right.
20 years later, you're doing Land's End to John O'Groats. The year after that, you get Lindbergh doing his first transatlantic flight, 1927. What a time in this industry to go from the first powered flight to Land's End John O'Groats to transatlantic to
Yeah, you're looking at exponential growth there, aren't you, really? I,
yeah.
I was talking to another guest recently, and he was saying that he felt that we're entering another golden
Mhm.
age with the new technologies that are coming through. So you're looking at hybrid and renewable energies, alternative fuels, new materials, unmanned aviation, all this sort of thing. Yeah, okay. So a moth, and a particular moth. So Golf
A
Echo
particular
Bravo
moth, but
Oscar. There you go.
you actually touched on the other reason, which is the Moth series as a whole, and the kind of we're so short on time to talk about it, but the birth of club aviation, and as you say, maybe coming up to this time again when the whole face of aviation might be changing. I think it's interesting to look back, almost 100 years ago,
Mhm.
and say what were we doing then.
That, I mean, I'll definitely come back and have a conversation with you at some point about that, because the whole Land's End John O'Groats thing, you've got some ideas spinning in my head now, and it came up in a conversation I had with somebody recently, looking at what we can do when we get our prototype up and running for the Swift. So that's an obvious one. So maybe we'll get a chance to have a
Absolutely.
cup of coffee.
That would be fantastic. If you're curious, the fastest it's ever been done is by an RAF Phantom,
All right.
Black Mike,
Yeah.
46 minutes and 44 seconds.
Wow. That
Seven,
is.
seven, yeah, 772 miles per hour apparently. Just pretty quick.
Yeah, that's not hanging about. That's not hanging about at all. Interesting. Okay, well, David, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. It's great to get a view of the other side of the industry, the part that nobody usually sees, or whatever, and especially from a remote regional perspective, because even though it's the same, it's so different and so much the same as something like Heathrow or JFK or whatever. It's the scale is massively different, but the ultimate objective is launching and recovering aircraft in the safest possible way and enabling people to get from A to B. It's a fascinating way to look at your industry. Thank you very much for your time coming on today, and I look forward to speaking to you. And if you do manage to get it yourself off the ground, fly safe.
Thanks very much, Mike. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you in Wick for a cup of coffee sooner rather than later.
That sounds good to me. I'll speak to you soon. So that was David Swanson. His work running the project of a remote community lifeline in the far north of Scotland can be considered pretty niche, but I found it fascinating to consider how the industry interacts with people who visit, work and live in such an area. With the airport being a major employer in the community, the whole question of STEM, STEAM and youth outreach becomes significant. To stop rural areas losing all their young people, it's vital to have career opportunities close to home. The airport and its public service obligation airline also allows residents to feel less isolated by providing rapid access to the rest of the country. It was interesting to hear about a section of the industry that many of the population may not have considered previously. And it's always good to learn something new, and it was great to hear from a recent convert to the aviation community. So, thanks to David for explaining how the system works. And thanks to you for listening. Fly safe. You have been listening to The Short Circuit, presented by Mike McLean and sponsored by Swift Aircraft with the hashtag Inspiring Aviation. This has been a Zoom Spike production.